She accidentally sent a message calling her Mafia Boss overrated and ego-drunk to the entire board of directors, and by morning, she was locked inside his penthouse tower with no way out. Joy A. Nicholson was staring at her phone screen, watching the little red receipts multiply beneath her message, and she knew, absolutely knew, her career was over. Her boss, Ricardo L. Folsom, wasn't just any CEO. He was a walking contradiction. A young, tattooed mafia boss who ran a billion-dollar empire with ruthless digital precision while dismissing anything that couldn't be controlled by an algorithm. Joy had spent 3 weeks trying to convince him that the company's antique data vault, full of original contracts, physical ledgers, and hand-signed agreements, was a security nightmare waiting to explode. He'd laughed at her. Actually laughed. Paper records? Joy, this isn't the 1950s. Everything that matters is encrypted and cloud-secured. So when she'd vented to her best friend late last night, exhausted, anxious, and furious, she typed exactly what she thought. Ricardo L. Folsom is overrated and ego-drunk on his own digital perfection. He's going to lose everything because he's too arrogant to see the holes in his own system. Except she hadn't sent it to her friend. She'd sent it to the Folsom Global Board of Directors group chat. And now, 12 hours later, Ricardo's assistant was escorting her to the top floor. Not to HR, but to his private penthouse office. The elevator doors opened, and there he stood. Sharp suit, dangerous eyes, tattooed hands folded calmly on his desk. "Joy," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "We need to talk about your assessment of my leadership." Joy's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she stepped into Ricardo's office. The space was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, dark wood paneling, and a desk that looked like it cost more than her annual salary. Everything was sleek, modern, controlled, except for the man behind the desk. Ricardo L. Folsom looked exactly like the rumor suggested. Young, unervingly calm, with dark hair swept back and tattoos creeping up from his collar and across his knuckles. He was studying her with a kind of focused intensity that made her want to apologize for existing. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Joy sat. Her legs felt like they might give out anyway. Ricardo picked up his phone, scrolled for a moment, then read aloud in a voice devoid of emotion. Ricardo L. Folsom is overrated and ego-drunk on his own digital perfection. He's going to lose everything because he's too arrogant to see the holes in his own system. He set the phone down and looked at her. "That's what you think of me?" I didn't mean to. I asked what you think, not who you meant to send it to." Joy swallowed hard. Her brain was screaming at her to backtrack, to grovel, to save what little remained of her career. But something in his expression, not anger but genuine curiosity, made her pause. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think you're brilliant with systems and algorithms, but you're ignoring physical vulnerabilities that could destroy everything you've built. The data vault, the paper contracts, the original ledgers, they're all sitting targets, and you won't even discuss securing them." Ricardo leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Necessary poison." "What?" "That's what you are. Necessary poison." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know how many people work for me, Joy? Hundreds. Every single one of them tells me what I want to hear. They praise my decisions, validate my strategies, and assure me that everything is under control." He turned to face her. "You're the first person in 3 years who's had the spine to tell me I'm wrong." Joy blinked. This wasn't firing. This was something else entirely. "In 8 days," Ricardo continued, "I'm finalizing the acquisition of Sokolov Industries. It's a $2 billion deal that will either cement the Folsom Empire or destroy it. The Sokolov family is ruthless, and they've been looking for weaknesses in our operation for months." He walked back to his desk and pressed a button. A hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a bank of monitors displaying security feeds, encrypted files, and what looked like architectural blueprints. I've spent years building a digital fortress. Unhackable. Untraceable. Perfect. But, Joy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But, Ricardo said, turning those cold eyes back on her, you've spent 3 weeks trying to tell me that perfection has blind spots. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to prove it. Joy's stomach dropped. I don't understand. For the next 7 days, you're moving into the executive wing of this building. 24/7 access. You'll act as my personal assistant, my analog security consultant, and my reality check. You'll examine every paper file, every physical access point, every obsolete record I've ignored. And if you find a single vulnerability that could compromise this deal, you'll have earned your job back. And if I don't? Ricardo's smile was sharp and humorless. Then you'll have proven me right, and you can leave knowing you were just another anxious secretary who confused caution for competence. The words stung, but Joy forced herself to hold his gaze. When do I start? Now. Ricardo pressed another button, and the door opened. His assistant appeared, holding a keycard and a tablet. Marcus will show you to your quarters. You have 1 hour to collect whatever you need from home. After that, you don't leave this building until the deal closes or you find what I've missed. Joy stood, her legs steadier now, and took the keycard. As she reached the door, Ricardo's voice stopped her. Joy. She turned. Don't make me regret not firing you. She met his eyes, and for the first time since the message sent, she felt something other than panic. She felt challenged. Don't make me regret being honest with you, she replied, and walked out before he could respond. Joy's quarters were less a bedroom and more a surveillance exhibit. Glass walls overlooked the city on one side and Ricardo's main office on the other, though he'd assured her the glass was one way. Everything was white, chrome, and aggressively modern. A bed that looked like it belonged in a spaceship, a desk with built-in touchscreens, and lighting that adjusted automatically based on some algorithm she didn't understand. She hated it immediately. It felt like living inside a hospital or a very expensive prison. There were no personal touches, no warmth, nothing that suggested actual human beings were meant to exist here. Just clean lines, cold surfaces, and the constant hum of climate control systems maintaining perfect temperature and humidity. Joy set her overnight bag on the bed, the only soft thing in the room, and tried not to think about how the next 7 days were going to feel like 7 months. A knock on the glass made her jump. Ricardo stood outside, still in his suit, looking impossibly composed for someone who'd just blackmailed his secretary into captivity. Follow me, he said when she opened the door. He led her down a hallway lined with more glass and steel, past conference rooms that looked like operating theaters, until they reached a heavy wooden door that seemed wildly out of place. It had an old-fashioned keyhole and hinges that looked like they predated the building itself. This, Ricardo said, producing an actual metal key, is the archive. He unlocked the door, and Joy stepped into chaos. The room was enormous, stretching back into shadows that the overhead fluorescents barely touched. Metal shelving units rose 15 feet high, packed with bankers' boxes, file folders, and loose papers that had clearly been shoved wherever they'd fit. Some boxes were labeled, most weren't. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled like old paper and neglect. This is every physical contract, ledger, deed, and agreement the Folsom family has accumulated over 40 years, Ricardo said from the doorway. He didn't step inside, Joy noticed. Like the room itself might contaminate him. My father believed in paper trails. I believe in encryption. We've digitized maybe 30% of this, but the rest. He gestured vaguely at the disaster. It's been on my list. For how long? Joy asked, running her finger along a shelf and watching the dust gather. 6 years. She turned to stare at him. You've ignored this for 6 years, and now you want me to organize it in 7 days? I want you to prove it matters, Ricardo corrected. If there's a vulnerability in my security, it's in there. Find it. Then he left, the heavy door closing behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Joy stood alone in the archive, surrounded by decades of deliberately ignored history, and felt something close to rage building in her chest. This wasn't a challenge. This was punishment disguised as opportunity. She pulled out her phone to text her friend, then remembered there was no one to text. No one who could help. She was locked in a high-tech fortress with a man who saw her either as a necessary irritant or a convenient scapegoat. Fine. Joy shed her blazer, rolled up her sleeves, and grabbed the nearest box. If Ricardo wanted proof that his perfect digital empire had cracks, she'd find them. Not because she wanted to save her job, though she did, but because she was tired of being dismissed as anxious and obsolete. By midnight, she'd created a preliminary system. Contracts by decade, ledgers by department, legal documents by type. Her hands were filthy, her hair had escaped its bun, and she'd sneezed so many times she'd lost count. She was also beginning to see patterns. Gaps in the filing dates. Boxes that should have been full but weren't. Sign-out sheets that listed the same name over and over, for materials that never came back. Joy pulled out her notebook, actual paper, because of course, and started writing. In his office across the hall, Ricardo watched her through the security feed, illuminated by a single desk lamp, surrounded by the past he'd spent years trying to escape. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if he'd been wrong. Joy didn't sleep that first night. Or the second. By day 3, she developed a system that would have made a librarian weep with joy. Color-coded folders, chronological organization, cross-referenced indices. Her anxiety, usually a liability, had transformed into hyperfocus. Every misfiled document felt like a personal failure. Every gap in the records demanded explanation. Ricardo appeared in the archive doorway each morning with coffee, black for him, laden with cream and sugar for her, which unnerved her because she'd never told him how she took it. He'd watch her work for a few minutes, ask if she'd found anything, then disappear back into his glass empire. On the third day, he stayed longer. "You missed breakfast," he said, setting a plate of toast on the only clear corner of the table she'd commandeered. "I'm not hungry." Joy didn't look up from the ledger she was examining, her finger tracing down columns of numbers. "You're also not sleeping. I have 4 more days." Ricardo moved closer, peering over her shoulder at the intricate web of sticky notes and string she'd created on the wall. A physical map of document relationships that her mind understood but no digital system could replicate. "This is excessive. This is thorough." Joy finally looked at him, and was startled by how close he was. Close enough that she could see the details of the tattoo snaking up his neck, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and woody. She took a step back, bumping into the table. "You asked me to find vulnerabilities. I'm finding them. Are you?" The doubt in his voice made her jaw tighten. She grabbed a stack of papers she'd been compiling and thrust them at him. "These are the physical access sign-in sheets for the data vault. Every person who enters has to sign their name, date, time in, time out. It's an old system, your father's system, but it's still active." Ricardo flipped through the sheets, his expression unreadable. And look at the signatures." Joy pulled out her notebook, where she'd been tracking patterns. Her handwriting was cramped and anxious, words underlined multiple times. Most people sign in maybe once or twice a year for specific retrievals. But this person, she pointed to a signature that appeared again and again, has been accessing the vault every 3 to 4 weeks for the past 3 years. So, maybe they have legitimate reasons. At 2 and 3 in the morning? Joy flipped to another page. And look at the timestamps. They're in there for hours. Not minutes. Hours. What legitimate business takes 4 hours in a document vault at 2 a.m.? Ricardo's expression shifted, the casual dismissiveness replaced by something sharper. He took the sheets from her and studied them more carefully. "The signature is nearly illegible," Joy finished. "But if you look at the capital letters and compare them to other documents, She pulled out a personnel file. The V and the F are distinctive. Whoever this is has been practicing making it hard to read, but habits are hard to break completely. She watched Ricardo's face as he made the connection she'd made 12 hours ago. Watched the moment his confidence cracked just slightly. "Vincent," he said quietly. "Your chief operating officer," Joy confirmed. "I haven't been able to verify it completely without comparing it to his actual signature on official documents, but the pattern matches. And there's more." She pulled out another file, this one much thinner. "This is the checkout log for physical materials. 3 years ago, someone signed out Ledger Volume 47. Original contracts and asset transfers from your father's deals with Eastern European contacts. It was never returned. Who signed it out?" Joy met his eyes. "The signature is clearer on this one." She handed him the sheet, and watched his expression go from analytical to cold fury in the space of a heartbeat. Vincent Caruso. Signed, dated, and never returned. Ricardo's hand tightened on the paper until it crumpled. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but Joy could hear the rage underneath. "How certain are you?" 90%, Joy said. "But I'd need to verify against his current signature and cross-reference with security footage if you have it archived." Ricardo pulled out his phone. "Marcus. My office. Nah. And bring every document Vincent Caruso has signed in the last 6 months." He turned back to Joy, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than arrogance in his face. She saw fear. Ricardo didn't speak for the rest of the day. He took Joy's findings, locked himself in his office, and disappeared into whatever digital forensics he could conduct without alerting Vincent. Joy returned to the archive, but her focus was fractured. She kept glancing toward the glass walls, watching Ricardo's silhouette move behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders tense. By 8 p.m., she couldn't take it anymore. She walked to his office and knocked on the glass door. He looked up, gestured her in. "Tell me I'm wrong," Joy said without preamble. "Tell me I'm seeing patterns that don't exist because I've been staring at paper for 72 hours straight and my anxiety is making me paranoid." Ricardo leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He looked exhausted in a way she hadn't seen before. Less like a dangerous mafia boss and more like a man who'd just discovered his world was built on a cracked foundation. "You're not wrong. I pulled Vincent's signature from 18 different internal documents. It matches. The timestamps match. And when I cross-referenced his building access records with those vault sign-ins, he was in the building every single time." Joy felt her stomach drop despite already knowing the answer. "What does that mean?" "It means my COO, the man I've trusted with access to every major deal, every security protocol, every strategic decision for 5 years, has been stealing physical evidence of my family's most sensitive arrangements." Ricardo's voice was flat, controlled, but his hands were clenched on the desk. The Sokolov family specializes in exploiting exactly this kind of leverage. If Vincent's been feeding them copies of those contracts, they know every weak point in my operation. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." The admission seemed to cost him. "If I confront him now, he'll disappear and take whatever evidence he hasn't already sold. If I wait until after the acquisition closes, he could sabotage the entire deal." He stood abruptly. "I need to think." He walked past her toward the door, then stopped. "Come with me." "Where?" "You'll see." Joy followed him down 2 flights of stairs, actual stairs, not the elevator, to a sublevel she hadn't known existed. The sterile corporate aesthetic disappeared, replaced by concrete walls and industrial lighting. Ricardo unlocked another door, and suddenly they were standing in a full training facility. Mats, heavy bags, weights, and weapons mounted on the walls. He shrugged off his jacket, loosened his tie, and began wrapping his hands with practiced efficiency. "This is how you think?" Joy asked, watching him approach one of the heavy bags. "This is how I don't break things I shouldn't break." He threw the first punch, and the bag swung violently. Then another. And another. Each hit landed with controlled fury, the sound echoing off the concrete. Joy stood awkwardly near the door, unsure if she should leave or stay. But something about watching him made her understand him in a way 3 days of tense conversations hadn't. This wasn't just stress relief. This was the only place he allowed himself to be anything other than perfectly controlled. After 10 minutes, Ricardo stopped, breathing hard, sweat dampening his shirt. Your findings were methodical. Logical. You didn't let your anxiety cloud your judgment. You let it sharpen your focus. He unwrapped his hands, wincing slightly at the redness on his knuckles. I dismissed you because I thought you were too nervous to be effective. I was wrong. Joy felt something shift between them. Not quite trust, but the foundation of it. I'm terrified most of the time, she admitted. But being terrified means I triple-check everything. It means I see the details other people miss because they're too confident to look. Ricardo crossed to where she stood, and she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. Vincent has been in my inner circle since before my father died. He helped me modernize the entire operation. I trusted him with everything. His voice dropped. How did I miss this? Because you were looking at the system, Joy said quietly. Not the people inside it. He held her gaze for a long moment, something vulnerable and raw in his expression. Then he stepped back, the walls going up again. Tomorrow, we verify everything. I need to know exactly what he took and who he's been talking to. Can you do that? Yes. Good. He grabbed his jacket. And Joy? Thank you. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. Joy woke on day 5 to find Ricardo already in the archive, standing in front of her wall of organized chaos with his arms crossed. He'd brought her coffee again, but it sat untouched on the table, going cold. Walk me through it, he said without turning around. Everything Vincent accessed. Joy grabbed her notebook, her safety blanket of handwritten observations and obsessive cross-references. Based on the sign-in sheets, he visited the vault 41 times over 3 years. Each visit corresponds to periods right before major negotiations or acquisitions. He wasn't randomly browsing. He knew exactly what he was looking for. The Sokolov deal started preliminary discussions 18 months ago, Ricardo said, his voice tight. How many times did he access the vault during that period? Joy flipped through her notes. 14. 14 times. Ricardo turned to face her, and she could see he hadn't slept. What was he taking? That's what I can't figure out. The checkout log only shows one item officially removed. Ledger Volume 47, the Eastern European contracts. But if he was in there 14 times in 18 months, he had to be accessing more than that. Either he was photographing documents, or there are materials missing that were never logged, Ricardo finished. My father's generation didn't always follow their own protocols. Especially near the end. Joy had been thinking the same thing. I need to physically verify what should be in the vault versus what's actually there. But I'd need the original manifest, the master list of every document your father archived. That would be in the executive safe. My father kept redundant records of everything important. Ricardo checked his watch. Vincent's at our downtown office today for the quarterly review. We have 4 hours. They moved quickly. Ricardo retrieved a leather-bound ledger from a safe Joy hadn't even known existed, its pages yellowed and covered in meticulous handwriting. His father's records were obsessively detailed, every contract, every agreement, every piece of leverage catalogued with dates and location codes. Joy spread the manifest across the table and began cross-referencing it with the physical archive. Ricardo worked beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as they reached for the same boxes, pulled the same files. The proximity should have made her anxious, but instead, it felt like they were finally on the same side of something. 2 hours in, Joy found it. Here. Her finger stabbed at an entry in the manifest. Ledger Volume 47B. Secondary records for the Kozlov Transport Acquisition, 1998. According to this, it should be on shelf J14, box 32. They went to the shelf together. Box 32 was there, labeled correctly. But when Joy opened it, her stomach sank. Empty. There's no checkout record for this one, she said, flipping frantically through her organized logs. Volume 47 was signed out officially, but this one, the secondary volume, just disappeared. Ricardo's jaw clenched. What was in it? Joy scanned her father's notes. Asset transfers. Physical property deeds. And, she stopped, her finger hovering over the entry. Original routing documentation for secure transport corridors. The exact routes your family used to move high-value cargo through Eastern Europe. The same corridors we still use, Ricardo said quietly. The same ones the Sokolov family has been trying to map for years so they can intercept shipments. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. If Vincent gave them those routes, every transport we've run in the last 3 years has been compromised. They'd know our schedules, our security protocols, our vulnerabilities. Joy watched the realization hit him, not just that Vincent had betrayed him, but the full scope of what that betrayal meant. How many deals had been mysteriously complicated? How many shipments had faced unexpected difficulties? How many competitors had seemed to know the Folsom family's moves before they made them? He's been selling us out piece by piece, Ricardo said, his voice dangerously calm. And I handed him the keys. Joy reached for his arm without thinking, then froze, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. But Ricardo didn't pull away. He just stood there, staring at the empty box that represented 3 years of systematic destruction. We have proof now, Joy said. Enough to confront him. Ricardo's expression hardened into something cold and final. No. Now we set a trap. Ricardo didn't move for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the empty box, his hand still resting on the shelf as if touching it might somehow make the missing ledger reappear. Joy had seen him angry, seen him cold and controlled, but she'd never seen him like this, hollowed out, stripped of the armor he wore so carefully. My father gave him that position, Ricardo said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 weeks before he died, he told me Vincent was the only one I could trust to help transition the business. That he understood both worlds, the old ways and the new systems. That he'd keep me honest. Joy set down her notebook, her heart aching at the rawness in his voice. I promoted him 6 months later. Gave him access to everything. Ricardo's hand curled into a fist against the shelf. He stood at my father's funeral and gave a eulogy about loyalty and honor. And the entire time, he was already planning how to gut everything we'd built. Ricardo. 3 years. He turned to face her, and Joy was startled to see his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. 3 years he's been in my inner circle. How many strategy meetings did I run past him? How many security decisions did he influence? Every time I ignored your concerns about physical vulnerabilities, was that my arrogance or his suggestion? The question hit Joy like a physical blow because she remembered now. Vincent had been in several of those meetings where she'd raised concerns about the archive, the paper trails, the analog access points. And each time, he'd sided with Ricardo's dismissals, reinforcing the idea that Joy was being paranoid and old-fashioned. He isolated you from anyone who might have noticed, Joy said quietly. That's what good moles do. They don't just steal information. They shape the environment so no one questions them. Ricardo slammed his fist into the metal shelf, the sound echoing through the archive. The violence of it made Joy flinch, but she didn't step back. She watched him fight for control, watched the cracks spreading across his carefully maintained facade. I'm supposed to be better than this, he said, his voice rough. Smarter. My father built this empire by reading people, by knowing who to trust and who to destroy. And I couldn't even see the knife in my own back. Your father didn't have to deal with someone like Vincent, Joy countered. Someone who understood modern systems well enough to exploit them while staying invisible in the digital records. You're not weak for missing this. He was just that good at hiding. Don't. Ricardo's voice cracked. Don't make excuses for me. He turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension, and Joy realized he was trying not to break down in front of her. Something in her chest twisted. This wasn't just about Vincent's betrayal. It was about Ricardo's entire identity crumbling. He'd built himself into someone untouchable, someone who controlled everything through perfect systems and ruthless efficiency. And now he had to face the fact that he was just as human and fallible as anyone else. Joy closed the distance between them before her anxiety could stop her. She placed her hand on his back, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. You're allowed to be hurt, she said softly. You're allowed to be angry and scared and feel betrayed. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Ricardo turned, and suddenly they were inches apart, close enough that she could see the war happening behind his eyes. Without thinking, Joy reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing his cheek. You trusted someone you loved, she whispered. That's not a failure. Something broke in him. Ricardo pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate intensity, his face buried in her hair. Joy froze for a heartbeat, then her arms came up around him, holding him while he shook with silent, furious grief. They stood like that for a long time, surrounded by decades of secrets and lies, while Ricardo finally let himself fall apart. When he pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. He cupped her face in his hands, his tattooed fingers impossibly gentle, and kissed her with an intensity that stole her breath. Joy kissed him back, crossing every professional line that had ever existed, and didn't care. The trap was supposed to be simple. Ricardo would announce he was transferring the most sensitive physical assets from the data vault to a new secure location. A location only he and Vincent knew about. They'd monitor Vincent's communications, catch him alerting the Sokolov family, and have irrefutable proof of his betrayal. What Ricardo hadn't anticipated was that Vincent had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. It was day 7, 2 hours before the Sokolov acquisition was set to finalize. Ricardo had gone into the data vault personally, claiming he wanted to verify the transfer protocols himself. Joy had stayed in the archive, monitoring the security feeds from her laptop, her anxiety a living thing in her chest. She watched Ricardo move through the vault on camera, his movements efficient and controlled. Watched him unlock the reinforced cabinet where the most critical documents were stored. Watched him begin cataloging items for transfer. Then every screen went black. Joy's laptop died. The overhead lights cut out. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in red, and then an alarm began shrieking through the building. Not the normal security alarm, but something deeper, more urgent. She ran to the vault door. It was sealed, the digital lock display showing nothing but error messages. Through the reinforced window, she could see Ricardo trying the interior release, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern when nothing happened. Joy pulled out her phone. No signal. The entire building's communications network was down. Then she heard Vincent's voice, distorted through the emergency speaker system. I'm sorry it came to this, Ricardo. I really am. Joy's blood went cold. You're too much like your father, Vincent continued, his tone almost regretful. Too suspicious, too careful. I knew it was only a matter of time before you started asking the wrong questions. I'd hoped to finish this acquisition and disappear quietly, but your anxious little secretary couldn't leave well enough alone. Through the window, Joy saw Ricardo's expression transform into pure rage. He slammed his fist against the door, shouting something she couldn't hear through the reinforced barrier. The vault is now on full environmental lockdown, Vincent said. In approximately 8 minutes, the oxygen concentration will drop to unsafe levels. The digital security system, the same system you were so proud of, is completely under my control. Every door, every lock, every failsafe. You built the perfect prison, Ricardo. And now you're locked inside it. Joy's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip her phone. She tried the emergency services, but nothing would connect. Vincent had isolated the entire building. Think. She ran to the main security panel, but it was completely frozen, showing the same error cascade Ricardo had described in meetings. The kind of catastrophic system failure that should have been impossible with their redundancies and backups. But Vincent had built those redundancies. He'd designed the backups. He'd left himself a kill switch. Through the window, she could see Ricardo was on his phone, trying everything, his movements becoming more urgent. The vault was already getting warmer. She could see it in the way he'd shed his jacket, the way sweat was beginning to gleam on his skin. Joy pulled at the door handle uselessly, knowing it was pointless. 3-inch steel, biometric locks, and digital fail-safes that were now working against them. There was no way to override it, no emergency release that Vincent hadn't already disabled. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned about the building systems. Ricardo had walked her through the security protocols, so proud of how interconnected and sophisticated everything was. Every system talking to every other system, creating an unbreakable web of digital protection. But the building was 40 years old. And beneath all that sophisticated technology, there had to be something older. Something analog. Something Vincent's digital takeover couldn't touch. Joy ran back to the archive, her heart pounding, and grabbed the original building schematics from her organized files. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unfold them, but she forced herself to focus, to let her anxiety sharpen into laser focus. There. A maintenance corridor. Original electrical systems. Pre-digital emergency overrides. She had 4 minutes. Joy ran through the corridors, the building schematic clutched in her sweating hands, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The maintenance access was supposed to be on sublevel 2, near the old mechanical rooms that predated Ricardo's renovations. She took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling twice. Her anxiety no longer a hindrance but fuel driving her forward. The door was unmarked, painted the same industrial gray as the walls, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Joy yanked it open and found herself in a narrow corridor that smelled like dust and old metal. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, and the walls were bare concrete. Nothing like the sleek glass and chrome aesthetic of the rest of the building. This was the building's skeleton. The part Ricardo had built over but never removed. She followed the schematic deeper, past junction boxes and valve wheels, until she found what she was looking for. A metal panel marked with faded yellow warning stickers about high voltage. Her hands fumbled with the latches, her fingers clumsy with panic. 2 minutes left. Maybe less. The panel swung open, revealing a chaos of old wiring, circuit breakers, and, there, a large manual switch that looked like it belonged in a 1980s power plant. According to the schematic, this was the original emergency power bypass, designed to route electricity around digital systems in case of catastrophic failure. It was exactly what she needed. Except the switch was in the OFF position and covered in rust and decades of neglect. Joy wrapped both hands around the handle and pulled. Nothing. She braced her foot against the wall and pulled harder, throwing all her weight into it. The metal groaned but didn't budge. Rust and corrosion had essentially welded it in place. No. Joy's voice broke into a sob. She could picture Ricardo in the vault, struggling to breathe, could see the timer in her head counting down. She pulled again, her palms burning, her muscles screaming. The handle shifted a fraction of an inch. Joy repositioned herself, planted her feet, and pulled with everything she had. The metal shrieked, her hands slipped, and she stumbled backward, her heel catching on an exposed pipe. She fell hard, her shoulder slamming into the wall, her hand shooting out instinctively to catch herself. Her palm connected with the switch handle with her full body weight behind it. The impact drove the rusted mechanism down with a sound like a gunshot. Electricity surged through the old system with a deafening hum. Sparks exploded from the junction boxes, showering Joy with bright flashes that made her throw her arms over her face. The lights in the corridor blazed impossibly bright, then shattered. The smell of ozone and burning insulation filled the air. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. Joy lay on the floor, her ears ringing, her hands burned and bleeding, breathing hard. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd made everything worse, that she'd just fried every system in the building and killed Ricardo instead of saving him. Then she heard it, the distant sound of alarms resetting, the hum of backup systems engaging, the clunk of magnetic locks releasing. Joy scrambled to her feet and ran. She burst back into the main corridor to find emergency lighting flickering back on. The digital displays were rebooting, showing startup sequences instead of error messages. And the vault door. The vault door was open. Ricardo stumbled out, gasping for air, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face flushed from heat and oxygen deprivation. His eyes found Joy, wild and disbelieving. She crashed into him, and he caught her, both of them sinking to the floor in a tangle of exhausted limbs. "You did it," Ricardo gasped. His arms locked around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. "How did you?" "Analog," Joy managed, her voice shaking with hysterical laughter. "The old system. The one you never bothered to remove." Ricardo pulled back just enough to see her face, and then he was kissing her, desperate and grateful and alive. In the distance, they could hear security teams responding, could hear Vincent's carefully constructed digital prison collapsing around him. But for this moment, they just held each other and breathed. Vincent was found in the building's central server room, frantically trying to purge evidence from the system when Ricardo's security team breached the door. He didn't resist. He just looked at Ricardo with something like resignation and said, "You were never supposed to look at the paper." Ricardo didn't respond. He just watched as they took Vincent away in handcuffs, the man who'd eulogized his father now headed for a much darker fate than any prison could provide. The Sokolov acquisition closed 40 minutes later via emergency video conference, with Ricardo still disheveled and smelling like smoke, his voice hoarse from the vault. The rival family never knew how close they'd come to destroying him. By the time Vincent's betrayal would have been useful, he was already in Folsom custody, and every stolen document had been secured. Joy watched it all from Ricardo's office, her hands wrapped in gauze, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. When Ricardo finally ended the call and turned to her, she saw something in his face she'd never seen before, complete and utter vulnerability. "I almost died today," he said, crossing to where she sat. "I almost lost everything. The company, the deal, my life, because I was too arrogant to believe that anything analog, anything old-fashioned, anything I couldn't control with algorithms and encryption could possibly matter." "Ricardo! No, let me finish." He knelt in front of her chair, taking her bandaged hands in his. "You tried to tell me. For weeks, you tried to tell me that my perfect digital fortress had cracks. And I dismissed you. I called your concerns outdated. I made you feel like your skills were obsolete and your anxiety was a liability." Joy's throat tightened. "You didn't know. I should have known." Ricardo's grip on her hands tightened. "Vincent played me perfectly because I wanted to believe I was smarter than my father's generation. That their way of doing things, paper trails, physical security, analog systems, was primitive. That I could build something so sophisticated that it would be untouchable." He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands moving to frame her face. "But you can't encrypt trust," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You can't algorithm your way past human betrayal. And you can't build a system so perfect that it doesn't need someone willing to look at the cracks everyone else ignores." His thumbs brushed her cheeks. "You saved my life today with a rusted switch and old wiring. You solved a 3-year infiltration with paper files and handwritten notes. You did everything I told you was impossible." "I was terrified the entire time," Joy admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." Ricardo smiled, and it was genuine and warm and completely unguarded. "Your awkward, anxious, obsessive brilliance is exactly what I need. What this company needs. What I need to balance the parts of me that are too convinced of my own perfection. Joy felt tears burning in her eyes. I'm still going to overthink everything. I'm still going to be clumsy and nervous and probably send inappropriate texts to the wrong people. Good. Ricardo kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips, soft and slow and full of promise. I'm still going to be arrogant and controlling and dismissive of things I don't immediately understand. We're both disasters. But together. He pulled back to look at her. Together, we might actually be balanced. So what are you saying? Joy asked, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. I'm saying I want you as my partner. Real partner. Not just my secretary or my security consultant or my 7-day prisoner. Full partner in everything. The business, the decisions, the risks. His expression turned serious. And if you're willing, in my life. All of it. Joy thought about the last 7 days. The isolation, the pressure, the terror. She thought about Ricardo's arrogance and her anxiety. About how they'd both been forced to confront the worst parts of themselves. And she thought about how, despite everything, they'd become something better together. Yes, she said simply. Ricardo kissed her again, and this time, there was nothing desperate or frantic about it. Just certainty and relief, and the beginning of something built on truth instead of perfection. Outside the windows, the city glittered in the darkness. A million digital lights and old stone buildings, new and old existing together. Just like them. 3 months later, Joy stood in the renovated archive, now a blend of climate-controlled preservation and cutting-edge digital scanning, and smiled at the brass plaque Ricardo had mounted on the wall. The essential truth lives in the details everyone else ignores. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy you can see, but the vulnerabilities you're too proud to acknowledge. Joy had learned that her anxiety wasn't a weakness. It was her superpower. And Ricardo had learned that perfection without humility is just arrogance waiting to collapse. If you've ever felt like your careful attention to detail makes you too slow, or your different way of seeing things makes you outdated, remember this. The world needs people who notice what everyone else dismisses. Your awkwardness might be exactly what saves the day. Thank you so much for watching Joy and Ricardo's story. If you enjoyed this journey from accidental insult to unexpected partnership, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about unlikely heroes finding their strength. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment. Was it the accidental text, the vault rescue, or the final confession? And let us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.